There is a condition more dangerous than ignorance and more corrosive than error. It is the lukewarm mind and the fearful heart, a mind that knows the truth yet hesitates to declare it, a heart that senses what is right but bows to pressure. Scripture calls this a double-minded man, unstable in all his ways. And there is a simple maxim: a man should not speak with a forked tongue. But what is the tongue except the servant of the mind and heart? What we speak is what we believe. And when the mind is confused or the heart is divided, speech becomes cowardice dressed as counsel. I lived this firsthand. When I was under criminal investigation by the IRS, two leaders of the largest church in my hometown told me, quote, "Submit to government in all things," end quote. Not because Scripture demanded it, not because the law required it, but because fear whispered louder to them than truth. Here is the tragedy. They admitted that I was right about the federal income tax laws. They admitted that jurisdiction was lacking. They admitted that no statute imposed a liability. And then, knowing that truth, they urged me to violate it. What are we to make of such shepherds, of such men who bend Scripture to accommodate fear? Do they fear government more than God? Do they twist sacred words to calm their conscience? The assistant pastor, Don Den Hartog, one of the few whose integrity stood unshaken, asked me a simple question that pierced through the noise. "Bo," he said, "would it be a sin for you to file and sign a federal income tax return?" I replied, yes. Because to attest falsely is to sin. To consent to a jurisdiction that does not exist is wrong. To bear false witness against my own signature is unjust. You see, Don understood. Man must not submit to government in all things. Not when obedience requires falsehood, not when compliance requires surrender of conscience, not when acquiescence demands that we deny who we are before God. I rejected the leadership of Fellowship Bible Church and did as I affirmed with Don Den Hartog. I refused to accept signing a federal form within a political jurisdiction that was not mine. Why? Because my spiritual jurisdiction reigned supreme. I discerned for myself with clarity that the race to be run and won required possible struggle, suffering, and subsequent triumph at a place and time that I knew not while I was in the thick of battle. But I am here now. Did I expect a corrupt judge and prosecutor to prevail over truth? No. Was it a possibility? Yes. Did I expect to go to prison? No. But know this, I did not submit, not then, not now, not ever. I did not submit on bended knee to a false deity. And here is the larger sickness. Those in government today at every level are tragically ignorant of the most basic constructs of the American Republic. And pastors across America are often worse. Why? Because they are unequally yoked to the IRS and the Internal Revenue Code, because they fear the loss of tax-exempt status more than the loss of moral clarity, because they have placed Caesar over God without ever admitting it. And one of the clearest symptoms of this is that most pastors expect members of their 501c3 organization to submit. Will you submit to church leadership, they ask? And in that question lies the entire problem. Most people answer yes instantly. They want to belong. They want community more than conviction. They want a social life more than spiritual discernment. They want to write off their tithes and reduce their tax burden. And in that moment, they surrender their capacity to rule their own minds and hearts with truth. They become the blind, following blind leadership, obedient not to God, not to conscience, not to truth, but to a tax-exempt institution operating in fear. Pastors throw back their shoulders and proclaim, quote, "Let us submit to government in all things," end quote. Not because it is righteous, no, because it is easy. This cowardice stands in sharp contrast to the pastors who built this nation. America was shaped not by timid clergy, but by a generation of fearless pastors known as the Black-Robed Regiment, shepherds who refused to bend their knee to tyranny. There was Jonathan Mayhew, whose 1750 sermon declared that obedience to tyrants is disobedience to God. There was John Witherspoon, the Declaration signer, who taught that rulers are servants, not masters. There was Samuel West, who preached that lawful resistance to oppressive government is obedience to God. There was Jonas Clark, whose parishioners fired the first shots at Lexington. Then there was George Whitefield, who condemned corrupt rulers and the arrogance of power, and Charles Chauncey, who defended natural liberty. Then there was Elisha Williams, who declared government that exceeds its bounds engages in usurpation. There was Peter Muhlenberg, who removed his clerical robe to reveal a military uniform. And James Caldwell, who shouted, "Give them Watts, boys," as he handed out hymnals for musket wadding. These men understood jurisdiction, covenant, and the limits of civil power. They knew that submission is conditional and never absolute. But today, where are such pastors? Where is truth? Ironically, across America, hundreds of thousands of pastors, priests, deacons, and elders teach thousands of conflicting interpretations of Scripture. If they cannot agree on the text they claim is divine, why would anyone expect them to speak truth about constitutional limits, sovereignty, or tyranny? The answer is simple. We don't, and we should not. They cannot confront government because they fear it. They cannot defend liberty because they do not understand it. They cannot lead because they have never stood, and they have never followed truth in this matter or in many others. And thus the Republic suffers for their silence and their inaction. The remedy is simple but costly. Sound mind, steadfast heart, and truth without trembling. For a nation cannot remain free when its leaders, civil or spiritual, are governed by fear, and a people cannot honor God without submitting to lies. The time for lukewarm devotion is over. The time for clarity, moral, legal, and spiritual, has come. With Thanksgiving Day approaching, when all Americans should give thanks to those spiritual giants who formed our nation and secured our God-given rights, we must also confront a sacred obligation to demand that those in positions of influence discern Scripture in keeping with America's principles. Can you imagine clergy nationwide rejecting their tax-exempt status and openly declaring that the federal tax laws are limited in scope as defined in the Liberty Dialogues? They would change the course of this nation for the better and forever. Thanksgiving is not a day merely to remember blessings. It is a day to remember the cost of those blessings. And to that end, we should seek a country anchored in truth and ready to defend it, and prepared, if necessary, to sacrifice again to restore and preserve the American Republic. And as we give thanks, let us also remember that gratitude is not passive. True gratitude carries responsibility. The spiritual giants we honor did not safeguard liberty with words alone. They defended it with conviction, courage, sacrifice, and allegiance to truth above all earthly power. If we are truly grateful for the rights they secured, then we must be willing to shoulder the same burden, to stand firm in conscience, and refuse submission to any false authority that seeks to place chains upon the mind, heart, or soul. Gratitude without action becomes complacency. Gratitude with resolve becomes freedom preserved. Do we truly believe that the current church leadership across the fruited plain will lead us to victory in restoring our God-given rights? Will they take the first step in a charge against oppression? Will they speak boldly against unlawful power? Will they confront the machinery of deceit rather than be a part of it? Or will they acquiesce and claim that we have a moral and spiritual duty to become digitally and biometrically absorbed into a federal database, fast-tracked into a cashless, surveilled, and controlled dystopian order, which is the very antithesis of what God desires? Or will we finally say to those timid and gutless cowards, yes, to hell with your mindsets and heart sets anchored in deceit? Share this message with friends and family during the Thanksgiving holidays. And as always, may truth reign supreme.